Welcome to the Cleveland Public Library's Sports Research Center and our conversation with Don Cockroft, the invaluable punter and place kicker of the Cleveland Browns from 1969 through 1980. For 9 of those years, Don both punted and kicked field goals and extra points, which was a rarity. Nobody else has done double duty for more than 30 years. He was All-Pro in 1972 and All-Conference in 1978. He's third on the Browns' all-time scoring list behind Phil Dawson and Lou Groza. Don is still an active member of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He's a compelling speaker and has addressed groups as large as 40,000. 2 years ago, Don finished a magnificent coffee table book entitled The Cardiac Kids, Our Untold Stories. For this book, he interviewed every living member of the 1980 Cleveland Browns. We sat down with Don on August 8th, 2013. We're joined today by Don Cockroft. Welcome to the Cleveland Public Library main branch downtown. Don, let me recap your career for those who are dialing us up now on the Public Library website. Don Cockroft is a legend in Browns history. He was the third place kicker in Browns history. Lou Groza did it for, over a 38-year period, there were only three place kickers.
That's right.
Lou Groza, Don Cockroft, and in the middle for 1 year, Sam Baker in 1960.
And he did a good job too. He had very good percentage.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah. Yes, he did. Well, he had a good career with the Washington Redskins before that. But that was Groza had retired for 1 year, then he came back. But you were born in 1945 to establish your time frame here. We are doing this. We're sitting here in 2013, and you are now 68 years old and looking mighty good.
Well,
a native of
you're just very kind, Dan. Thank you very much.
A native of Colorado, went to Adams State. You began as a walk-on, and then you got a scholarship. By your senior year, in addition to being the punter and the place kicker, you were also the starting safety. You were drafted in 1967 by the Browns in the third round, the 55th player taken. That was highly unusual that a kicker was drafted that high. That didn't happen very often.
Not back then.
And you then had 13 seasons with the Browns, 1968 to 80. For 9 of those seasons, you did 2 jobs. You punted and you place kicked. And you, for several of those seasons, in the middle 6 straight seasons, in fact, your punting average was over 40 yards a game. Over 40 yards a punt, I should say.
Right. No,
for 6 of those seasons. Now, you were doing 2 jobs. I hope that you were paid accordingly.
I wish I would have been, but no. We've shared a little bit.
Yes.
Art was a tough negotiator, so if we want to get into that later, we can, Dan.
Okay. Well, I might point out that back in those days, only 2 others after Don Cockroft did double duty as both punting and place kicking, and only for a couple of years after you retired. You had 2 punts in your of 71 yards. Mm-hmm. You had a 57-yard field goal. I mean, your records just go on and on. You're the 3rd highest scorer in Browns history. But what we remember more than anything, not the games that you won, the game that you weren't there at the end to kick. The 1980 playoff game against the Oakland Raiders. You use a quote in your book. By the way, your book. Hold that up.
Okay, there we go.
This was a terrific book. I loved it, and I recommend this to everybody. It's a little pricey, $54.90 but anyway, however, it's worth every penny.
Thanks.
And naturally, this focuses on the 1980 season, the Cardiac Kids season, when this town went. We thought that the Browns had a great following before that. Nothing like 1960. Right. Songs were written about you guys.
The 12 Days of a Cleveland Brown Christmas.
Yes, it was the #1 hit song that Christmas season here in Cleveland. And And it all came, the games one after another, they were cardiac thrillers every Sunday after Sunday. And the great players on that team, and you talk to all of them in this book. Let's get back to that game momentarily. Everybody's sitting there, I know, get to the game. Okay, let's get to the game. That's the playoff game when that we lose to the Raiders 14-12.
Right.
January, 4th, 1981. And it was 2 degrees on the lakefront. Coldest I've ever been. How about you?
Dan, it was 2 degrees, but the official chill factor was 36 below zero that day. It was, in my 13 years with the Browns as a kicker, there was not another game that even came close. It was cold is not even the word you use. It was windy, and that's what made it so cold. The field was frozen in most parts. The first field goal I attempted that day, Paul McDonald was my holder, holding the ball. The ball is sliding on the ice towards the upright when I kicked it. And, of course, we missed it. But, no, it was an absolutely horrendous.
Well, was that the extra point?
No, that was the first field goal was a 47-yard attempt into the open end down there, which would have been a miracle to make on a perfect day. Yeah. And we had an extra point that was actually blocked. And, we missed a couple field goals, had an extra point blocked. We had a field goal we didn't even get to try to kick because we bobbled the ball. And but I do say I made the last 2 attempts before the infamous play that you were referring to.
Third quarter, you kicked both of them, I think, were 31 yards each. And it was with 41 seconds left. I don't have to, some things people don't want to be reminded about. But we were, what was it, second down?
Second down on the 13.
On the 13-yard line.
So it had been a 30-yard field goal.
Okay, would have been good field goal range for you, even in those conditions. But on the second down, Sam went for it all. He said, I was going to try to win it on the second down, and if we didn't get it then, we were going to kick the field goal.
Yeah.
So, but that is the famous pass that was intercepted in the end zone, aimed for Ozzie Newsome, I guess. But would you tell us what went on? And 41 seconds were left in the game here.
Right.
This was the game that the Browns were favored to go to the Super Bowl that year.
Right. It was,
And this was the first playoff game against the Oakland Raiders, and they were a wild card team.
Yeah, they were the wild card team. And, we thought it was our destiny that year because of the way we won games, both in 79 and 1980, and that's where the Cardiac Kids came from. So, it was only destined that we were going to be there. And Dan, you were there, and there were 77,000 other people sitting in that minus 36 below all day long.
But we were not in the huddle on the sidelines just before the play.
No, well, I was listening.
Yes.
I was standing there.
Yes.
And I heard Sam as he talked to Brian, and just as we've already said, he discussed this play, Red Right 88, slot D dig or something. It's a little bit longer than Red Right 88. And that pass play was really designed for Dave Logan. Ozzie Newsome and Reggie Rucker are on the right side, and they clear out, and Logan pauses and comes underneath. And that was the play that was designed. And Sam will tell you today that Dave Logan was wide open. But we weren't in Brian Sipe's shoes, and we will never criticize Brian Sipe because we wouldn't have been there without Brian Sipe that year. And the video shows, the replay shows, he's back and drops back, and he's looking, and he's slipping and sliding on the ice. And Ozzie kind of breaks open in front of Mike Davis for just a moment, and he tries to get the ball to Ozzie going across the middle, right to left. And Brian said this, and I put it in the book. His quote is my only failure there was that play called for a touch pass, a lob pass over the. You don't do that with a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And he said, I should have just thrown it hard. Ozzie either gets it or it's an interception. but it's history. And
what was the last thing Sam said to Brian?
well, of course, the very, very famous and very appropriate words that Sam said to Brian as Brian came off. You can only imagine the dejection. I mean, he had such a great year. We had such a great year, and now it's over. And ironically, you couldn't hear yourself think as we were marching down the field. Prior to that last 41 seconds, we went from the 13 to the 13, and the crowd was just going, you couldn't hear. And of course, when Mike Davis intercepted that pass, it was dead silence. I mean, you could hear people breathing in the stadium. It was, you were there. But to answer your question, Sam specifically went to Brian and said, Brian, I love you. And like I said again, it wouldn't have happened.
But he did tell Brian, if the play is, if he isn't open, throw it into Lake Erie.
Back to your original thought, Dan, yes, on the sideline, and that's what I remember as they decided to run this pass play, and Brian started back out on the field. I remember Sam saying specifically, Brian, if there's any congestion, throw the ball into Lake Erie. And I yelled, Brian, whatever you do, get it on the right hash mark.
Oh, really?
Because that wind was right to left, and that would have increased my odds had we gone in for a field goal.
Oh, that's great. Now he's got to throw the pass. He's got to remember, got to get it on the right hash mark.
Right. No, I don't think he heard any of that because the crowd, you couldn't hear yourself think. But Dan, it was, and it's so funny because we I'm sure we'll talk about the book. And when I started this book over 5 years ago, if I may, after coming back from Colorado, people, that's all they talked about was Red Right 88 and the 1980 Cardiac Kids, and these guys like they were family. And that's when I decided, to maybe I'll do a book on that season. And my wife, Barb, is a 35-year English teacher, language arts teacher, reads more than I've ever read in my life. In one day she reads. And I asked Barb, I said, Barb, if we do what do we call the book? And 2 days later she came back. She said, call the book Red Right 88.
Oh my God.
From Destiny to Despair, the 1980 Cardiac Kids. And you think about it, Dan, and I mean how appropriate that would be. And that's what I was going to call this book. Really? And then I began to realize, now that was the end of the season, but that was not the defining moment of that season and that team. And so we ended up, the pre-title is Season of Destiny, A Moment of Despair, A Lifetime of Memories. The 1980 Cardiac Kids, Our Untold Stories. So I wish we'd have kicked. I wish Ozzie would have caught the pass. I don't know. And maybe I wish we'd have won the Super Bowl. But whatever the case is, because of Red Right 88, we have a very large 672-page history book about that season.
Yes. I'll never forget. Henry Shepard couldn't really talk. He was stomping up and down in that locker room, almost insane.
After the game?
After the game, yes.
Well, here's one of the stories. You know, Tom DeLeon, one of the greatest guys that's ever been on a Cleveland Browns team, was a center. And that's one thing I did in the book, Dan. I asked these players, okay, give us your memories of Red Right 88. And Tom said, Don, when they called the pass play, he said, I almost didn't snap the ball. He said, but I know that would have caused mutiny. Because everybody just felt, I guess, again, no, that's not what we want to do. But in defense of Sam and the call, I'm telling you right now, there was no guarantees on that 30-yard field goal that day because it was miserable. And I'd be honest with you, I'm one of 5 people, and I never agreed with it at the time, but after all this perspective and going back, Brian Sipe got us there. And nobody's expecting the pass, and had it worked the way it planned, Dave Logan probably would have had a touchdown. But it didn't happen. Life goes on, Dan. You know that. Life goes on. And it's a great memory, I guess. Not Red Right 88, but the 1980 Cardiac Kids.
You have finally reconciled yourself to Red Right 88. That's good.
I have. Yes. I have, yeah. Now, would I made the kick? I've made it over 1,000 times since then and haven't missed. In my dreams and my sleep.
If we had kicked and you made it, would that have changed people's lives? Would it have changed your life?
That's a loaded question, Dan. I believe it would have changed my life. I'll be honest with you. I believe it would have changed my life. I had the honor and privilege and so thankful. It was a tough year for me physically and all of that, and missed a couple of important kicks during the course of the year, and I got that opportunity down in Cincinnati before the last game of the season, and with a minute and 22 seconds left, I believe it was 37-yard field, I'm not sure, to put us up 27-24, and we held on to win. So I was an integral part of winning the division championship. And I really pictured getting that opportunity because I had a tough year. I mean, it was tough emotionally, mentally, physically, and I really thought we'd have that opportunity to go out there and make the kick. And had we made it, I'm going to be really bold right now and said I probably would have kicked another 2 or 3 years for the Cleveland Browns.
Really?
Now, I may be wrong. That's my inside gut feeling. Because they'd have found it hard to get rid of me if we'd have kicked the field goal in those conditions to win that ballgame. That's what I believe.
Okay. Physically, you were busted up pretty bad.
I had torn cartilage, played with it all year. My left knee, we had to tape my knee so I couldn't bend it, because once I bent it too far, it locked and I couldn't even stand on it. And worse than that was I had suffered 2 herniated discs that, we had epidurals. So I was not in good shape physically. I'm never going to make an excuse, but it was not a great year for me. It's ironic that I write a book about that year, but it was a great year for Cleveland Browns, I'll tell you what.
But you were not ready to retire. And would you have? Why didn't you come back and play with somebody else after?
Well, I was not ready to retire. I had knee surgery after the 1980 season. Okay. I went back to Colorado. I always went back to Colorado during the off season. I had therapy to strengthen my back and get my back fixed during the whole off season. And I came back in pretty good shape in 1981. And I still knew I could kick the football, and I could kick it well enough. And as it turned out, they made the decision and kept a gentleman we've talked about, Mr. Dave Jacobs. I had made a determination once the Browns released me. I had really serious questions about Dave Jacobs.
Okay,
I competed him with.
Okay, now let's clarify this, Dave Jacobs. This was in training camp of 1981.
Right.
You're in the situation of competing for a job, and they bring in Dave Jacobs, young kicker from out of Syracuse, I believe. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so to everybody's surprise, they pick Dave Jacobs and release you. So that's this Dave Jacobs whose name comes up here.
Right. Dave was a very short soccer-style kicker, and I guess he had a good college career. And the kid could kick the football, but
he did it wasn't the Carrier Dome built then? Didn't he kick indoors?
I'm not sure, Dan, where he kicked. Yeah. But bottom line is, the Browns make the decision to keep Dave, and I really feel, Dan, in all honesty, again, the injuries that I suffered and played through the entire year, I think had a big factor in the decision. I know it didn't help me in 1980, in my kicking, and I really believe it was the injuries. As a matter of fact, I sued Art Modell.
Oh, you did?
For releasing me under those conditions, and I actually won the lawsuit.
Oh, you did?
It took 5 years, but I just felt, again, I was let go because of injuries, and I know the decision. I can't say why. I mean, Sam made this decision, and this decision was made. One thing I like to share is this, and my wife at that time, on that Sunday after the Green Bay Packer game, Sunday, and the final cut's got to be on Tuesday, and my wife and I go to church with my 2 daughters at that time, and we get back home and to have dinner. She cooked a great chicken dinner, and we had grace before lunch. And this is so true. And I didn't even feel like praying because I knew my job was on the line. I said, Diana, why don't you just pray? So my wife prayed. Diana at that time prayed, thank you, Lord, for our food, etc. And I remember distinctly saying, Lord, be with Sam as he makes this decision. And, I'm thinking, how about me, dear? and my life's in God's hands. And Dan, it wasn't 30 seconds after she said amen, the phone rang. Yes, Sam Ritigliano, Don, we're going to go with Dave Jacobs. You understand what I'm saying here? Was that a coincidence?
Wow.
Or does God really care for us? You know what I'm saying? So, for all of that, Dan, maybe we can get off of this, but I've always felt my hands are in God's hands, not in Art Modell's, not in Sam Ritigliano's. He's got a plan for my life. His Word, His Bible, He tells us that very clearly. And I've always trusted Him. I've failed in many ways, but He hasn't failed me. And so I just believe again. I mean, I wish we had hours to talk about some of the stories. Mike Davis, the interception. Guy couldn't catch a cold in Alaska, barefooted, but he caught that pass. And maybe it was destiny for the Oakland Raiders as they won that championship that year. But I've kind of got off track here, Dan.
This leads us to another aspect of your life, which you've touched on it. Let's finish that thought. You've been a 40-year member of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You've spoken at assemblies, you name it, up to. You once talked in front of 40,000 people at a Billy Graham congregation. What? So anyway, I can see why you can say with total conviction that your life is in God's hands.
Yeah. This is kind of strange. And again, I'm going to try to be brief with this, but God tells us, Jesus Christ Himself in His Word, in the book of Matthew, I think it is Matthew 33, Mark 33, He said to the people, if you want to follow me, Christ said this, if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross daily, whatever that might be, and stay close to me. Dan, in 72, when I had my very best season with the Cleveland Browns, prior to that season, I came to the conclusion that I need to give up pro football. I had to say, Lord, take my life and use it however you want. If that means giving up pro football, this was before the 1972 season, I said, whatever it takes. And Dan, I did that in a prayer. I said, Lord, take my life. I came back to Cleveland and thought my career was over. I really did. But I had peace in my heart, okay? Because
what were you going to do if you didn't?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I would be a pastor. Maybe I'd be a minister. Maybe I'd be a missionary. I don't know. Maybe I'd just be me. I didn't know what the future held. I just know that God says and I did that. And I gave the game up in 1972 before the season started. That's when they drafted George Hunt to replace me. And I came back, and that's when Al Tabor, and if you read, and I know you read this book, I really pay special tribute to Al Tabor. He was the Browns' first special teams coach. He was here in 1972, and he was on my side. He said, Don, you're the kicker. Nobody can kick as you're kicking. My point, going back to Billy Graham, that was in 1972 when they had the Billy Graham Crusade at the stadium.
Oh.
In the summer, they call me and say, would you share your testimony on at the Billy Graham Crusade? And I'm thinking, because again, this is before the season, before I don't really give up football, but I do in my heart and mind. It's before all this happens. It's like, hey, there's not a greater way to leave Cleveland than to stand on that field where I'd kicked for 4 or 5 years and tell people the most important thing in his life is your relationship with the person of Jesus Christ. And there was 40,000 people there, and it was one of the most scary moments of my life. But my point is that, yes, you brought that up, and that was a memory that I'll never forget.
Well, you evidently changed your mind, and it's a good thing you did. You made All-Pro that year.
Yes, I did. It was, and really it was just, I had a peace in my heart and my mind to know that I was in God's will, and this was just part of God's whole plan. So that was 72. We went on to 1980, with the career.
Like everybody else, you were angry when Art Modell moved the team to Baltimore. you have also seemed to reconcile yourself with that. Would you tell us about that?
Well, I spoke with Art in doing the book. One of my first goals was to interview every living player and coach. I insisted on that, and I finally got that. Bill Cowher was the last, but really? I got him. And I also talked to the doctors and Art Modell. And I was hesitant to call Art because he and I did not have a good relationship. And be honest with you, Dan, I don't have bitter feelings for Art Modell for leaving Cleveland. I wish he didn't. I wish he hadn't. I wish he didn't have to. You and I will never know, did he really have to? You know, we don't know the inside story, but I believe Art Modell loved Cleveland, Ohio. I know Art Modell loved Cleveland Browns fans. And I do feel, and my teammates, as I discussed that in this book, many of them, you know, a couple of them were inside, and they said, Don, it was a business decision. And I look at it this way, Dan. If you're hurting financially, and I believe Art was financially, believe it or not, and you've got somebody that offers you $50, $60 million for the team, and you keep the team, what are you going to do? You know, so I think that was a business decision that had to be made. I believe with all my heart. You and I've shared. My contention with Art was more personal, you know, but I wish he didn't. I mean, Cleveland.
But have you forgiven him for that? You said
I've forgiven him. I didn't have to forgive him for the leaving Cleveland because that was, I think, a decision they probably had to make for himself and to survive, maybe even. Yes, I have forgiven Art in my heart for the animosity, not the animosity, but I just didn't like Art Modell. And I shared with you, I had to negotiate with him, and he made me feel like he was doing me a great favor just for me to be on his team. And you shared earlier, did you get paid for 2 jobs that you did? No, I didn't, you know. And he made it clear that, hey, if I was playing quarterback, you know, I wouldn't be getting any more money, so. But yes.
So anyway,
in my heart, I'm clear with Art. Yeah.
So you negotiated your own contract, and you negotiated directly with Art, and that didn't make for a happy marriage.
No, and that didn't, because again, I took everything personally, personal, and I think Brian Sipe was one that Art wanted to talk to him when he was doing really well and renegotiate, and Brian said, no, you will talk to my agent, you know, and that was a wise thing.
Ed Keating, his agent, yes.
Is that it?
Okay. You mentioned, Brian said, let's talk about, you played for three terrific quarterbacks. Now, well, you started actually with Frank Ryan, but he was hurt and was replaced about 3 games into your first season with the Browns. So you mainly played for with Bill Nelson, briefly Mike Phipps, and then Brian Sipe. Would you discuss the 3 quarterbacks?
Well,
or do you want to touch Frank Ryan?
Oh yeah.
By the way, Frank got hurt in a Pro Bowl game by one of the defensive ends of the Baltimore Colts, who still, at that time, resented the fact that in the 1964 championship game, late in the game with a 27-0 lead, Frank tried to throw another long touchdown pass to Paul Warfield.
Oh, no, I didn't know about that. Little revenge.
Yes. And anyway, it wasn't complete, but he tried to do it. And that stuck in the craw of the Baltimore Colts, and they finally got their revenge in a Pro Bowl game. So anyway, by this time,
what goes around comes around.
So, but anyway, that's only to explain that to our listeners that you come in 1968 as your first season, and for that, Frank was on his way out because his shoulder had never healed from that Pro Bowl game of 2 years before that.
Yeah, Dan, I came in '67. That's when I was drafted, but I spent that first year on the taxi squad. So I was with Frank that year. Okay. That's why earlier.
Oh, I see.
And then in 1968.
Yeah, that's right.
But I love Frank Ryan. He was a great guy, and I was a quarterback in high school, and I could throw the ball a long ways, and he was either passing or running plays.
Yeah.
So I got to know Frank well, threw a lot of passes to Frank, and then
smart guy. Everybody said how smart he was. Was he football smart also?
Yes.
He had a PhD in mathematics or physics or something from Rice.
I'll never forget the first Christmas, and it might have been in '67. Really? We were invited a lot of the rookies, or some of us, to Frank's house.
Really?
And he sat there and talked about the computer and how this was all going to eventually be computerized, the plays and this. And I'm sitting there, okay, whatever. But no, he was brilliant, and I still admire Frank Ryan. Bill Nelson took over for Frank
In the fourth game of the 1968 season.
Billy was one of my holders. He held for me the first year that I led the NFL in field goal percentage. Bill and Brian Sipe, I see a lot of similarity in both of them. Not tall enough, not strong enough, not fast enough, but they did the job because they were gifted. They were both very good athletes. But they weren't supposed to be able to do what they did. And certainly Brian Sipe overcome all the odds. And 13th round draft choice. I think there were 10 quarterbacks drafted before Brian, the year that he was drafted 13th round by the Browns. And another gentleman we haven't mentioned, but was Blanton Collier. Blanton Collier played such an important role in so many players' lives. Myself, when I came here, and I did both, he said, "Don, you can do this." He believed in me. And Brian Sipe shares in his story. It was Blanton Collier who convinced him that he was capable. And so, again, it's just amazing what certain people do and never get recognized for. But Blanton Collier, I agree with him. He should be in the Hall of Fame. I really do. Anyway, Frank and Bill Nelson, good old Billy Nelson, and Mike Phipps. Mike was probably one of my closest friends.
Really?
And, of course, in '72, he had a really good season. It's just too bad he couldn't build on it and go forward. But
why was that?
I don't know. I sort of speculate. Bill Nelson and Frank Ryan and Brian Sipe were born leaders. I mean, they demanded certain things as the quarterback. And I didn't see that in Mike Phipps. I didn't see him take that controlling edge that these other guys did. But '72, he had a phenomenal year. I was the MVP for the Browns in '72. He should have been.
Really?
Absolutely.
Blanton did not want to make the trade that brought Mike Phipps here. We traded Paul Warfield to Miami for the second pick in the draft. And Blanton Collier told me he was not in favor of making that deal. He went down to Purdue and talked to the coaches and came back and advised Art, do not make the deal. And Blanton said he was the only one in Art's brain trust who voted against making the trade. But anyway, but you're right. Then but Modell wanted that trade, and he seemed to be vindicated in that 1972 season when Mike's had such a great season.
He had a good season. It was an exciting year. '72, of course, for me. I mean, everything went well for me. But Blanton Collier was a phenomenal individual. I couldn't say enough about Blanton. I mean, he worked with me diligently.
Did he?
I just was blessed with a strong leg. And don't tell people, I went to Alamosa, Adams State College, averaged 48 yards a punt my senior year. Well, that's 7,700 feet elevation. You kick a bad punt, it goes 40 yards. Okay, the pros maybe didn't know that. But still, it all happened. It really happened. And thank goodness Blanton Collier was here when I got here, because again, the teacher that he is, the compassionate person that he is, the love that he has for his players and their families. I mean, he was the perfect person for me, and he again worked with me and convinced me. I'm Adams State College, Dan. I mean, I'm a walk-on at a 1,200 student school. Nobody else is interested. But God gave me some talent, and the book's dedicated to Cleveland Browns fans in the honor and memory of Blanton Collier and Al Tabor.
And those are nice sentiments. Blanton Collier was deaf, as many
pretty
of
close.
Yes, he told me that when he was a kid, he would like be sitting in a doctor's office, and he would notice other people talking to each other. And he said, they never talked to me. And he said, I thought that I was socially backward. He said, I didn't realize that if somebody said something to me, I never heard them. And so they thought something was wrong with me, and I didn't react to them. So anyway, and the story of how he had to fool the Navy to get into the Navy. He was rejected by the Army because of his hearing loss. And so he felt that he had to change his life, or he would always be, sorry to get off on this tangent, but he said he always would have been a high school football coach in Paris, Kentucky, if he didn't do something to drastically change his life. World War II broke out, and tried to join the Army. No, that didn't work. Was able to fool the Navy into passing their hearing test, got into the Navy. And then when they retired, this guy's deaf. So he became a swimming instructor at Great Lakes Naval Air Station. That's where he met Paul Brown. But we digress. That perhaps would be a good story for another day. But I appreciate your sentiments about Blanton Collier. You picked the right. He was great. But when some players said that he knew something about every position.
Yes.
Where did he learn about kicking?
Well, he paid attention. I'm sure he paid attention to everything that went on. I mean, I was amazed. I try to tell people I took up golf to help my kicking.
You did?
I did, because one of the most important things in kicking is keeping your eye on the ball. Don't look up. You keep your head down. Well, if you hit a golf ball, you've got to keep your eye on that ball and hit through the ball. So I figured, and Blanton encouraged me to take up golf.
Really?
But he gave me a whole new perspective. He said, Don, there's about 10 things that are really important in punting and kicking, both separate different things you've got to focus on. And I remember that first year, he says, I want you to go out and I want you to punt that football. You know, first 10 punts, all you think about is the drop. Don't think about just the drop. It's got to be perfect, the drop. The next 10 punts, think about your toe extension. You got to have that toe down. The next 10, think about kicking through the ball. Think about following through the ball. There was like 10 different things. And he said, Don, when you do this every day in practice, kick 10, and that's what your focus, eventually you will find one thing that you can focus on, and it's going to bring all the rest together. And that's exactly what happened. And that's the same thing I do in golf when I do hit.
The one thing. Do you remember what that one thing was?
Yes, it was. It was driving through the football. Because I had to drive through the football. You had to get the ball out in front of you, and you certainly are going to follow through if you drive through the football. So I pictured kicking that ball almost to the moon. You know, so it was that mental thing that really helped. So he was a brilliant coach, great teacher, and I tell people, you know, and I do a lot of speaking now, Dan, and one of the things this season, the 1980 Cardiac Kids, I asked Ozzy, I asked all the players, what was the life lesson for that season? And Ozzy said it right on the head. He said, Don, live today as if there is no tomorrow. And you know what I'm talking about, Red Right 88. Because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Okay.
And one of the things I do, I tell people, you know, we only have today. If I can encourage you today with one good word, it's worth it. And I try to encourage people because, you know, Coach Sam's a great encourager, and the most inspirational ball player in the 1980 team was not Brian Sipe, was not Clay Matthews, was not Ozzie Newsome. It was a name nobody even hardly recognizes as Henry Bradley, defensive tackle. Why was he so inspirational? One, he gave 110% every time he put that uniform on, and we all knew it. There was no jogging for him. Really? But he was just an inspiration because of what he did. And again, I'm preaching, so forgive me.
No, that's okay. I find that interesting about Henry Bradley.
Yeah?
I think he moved to Italy, didn't he? Doesn't he live in Italy?
No, he's out on the West Coast.
Did he ever live in Italy?
Not Henry.
No. Okay.
And my co-writer really picked it well, Dan. And I told him, he did the layout of the book. He chose the photos for the book, and I told him this book is going to be a book about life more than about football. I want people to learn and grow and be challenged by this book. And when I got the first copy, the first picture in the book is not Brian Sipe. He's the next picture, was Henry Bradley. Why? Because most of the players said it would have been Henry Bradley that was probably the most inspirational ball player on that team that year. So,
by example, or did he ever say anything? Did he?
Total example. Just his life and his work ethic and everything was. He brought. I mean, people said, well, Henry'd come and he'd bring that little sack lunch to practice and he'd sit there quietly in his locker. But man, when he got on the field, his play spoke volumes. And I didn't even know that until I did the book, because I wanted to find out, I mean, we were an inspiration.
Defensive lineman, wasn't he?
Yeah, defensive lineman. Oh, his story is phenomenal. I mean, he was drafted by the San Diego, I think, or free agent. They cut him, went to Oakland, he was cut. He finally gave up that he was going to play pro football. Pro throw was with the Browns at that time, knew him in San Diego, asked him to come to Cleveland. And he was very hesitant because he'd already been released twice. And Pro Throw convinced him to come to Cleveland. And Henry's story was he was in training camp. He was on the last cut. They let him go. So his life is, okay, he's done. But they wanted him to stay in Cleveland. And he stayed in Cleveland.
Henry wanted to stay here?
No, he wanted to go home. Oh. He was done. But they convinced him that if anybody gets hurt, Henry, you're going to be our man. And he stayed in Cleveland, drove a truck just to pay bills for 9 weeks. And Jerry Shirk got hurt, if you remember. Anyway, they activated Henry Bradley with only 3 or 4 games left in the game. I mean, his story is so positive. It's pretty cool. So I don't know why, Dan. I think I like this book. I come back to it all the time, but it's pretty cool.
Yes, well, no, we want you to. We're in a library. We should be talking about your book.
Can we give folks my website if they want to get
Absolutely.
the book? If anybody's interested, they can go to my website. It's very simple, thecardiackids.com. The, T-H-E, cardiac with a K, thecardiackids.com. And right now I don't sell the book anywhere else, so that's where people can find it.
Okay, how did the Cardiac Kids ever get their nickname?
We talk about that. It's the first part of the book, and we really researched that, and it came down to a couple, and I can't even think the writer's name, but he wrote a story in '79, and in the words in the story, we beat somebody again late in the game. This all started in '79 when the Cardiac Kids started winning games. And he made mention, I'm sorry, I can't think. It wasn't Chuck Heaton. But he said, the Cardiac Kids do it again. And then the writer's headliner said something, that was the title, the Cardiac Kids do it again. And that's the best we can come up with is one of the writers in '79 mentioned the Cardiac Kids, and then the headliner put it in the paper, and next year, of course, it just really blossomed.
Yeah. So Mike Phipps was he one of your best friends on the team?
Mike, I like Mike. He's a good friend. He held for me too.
Yeah.
It's like Nelson held for me, Phipps held for me, Sipe held for me, and because back then it seemed like quarterbacks were holders.
That's right.
No, I like Mike a lot. He visited me a couple times out in Colorado. He had some property out there, and I just liked him. Yeah.
Do you ever stay in touch with any of those guys?
I talk to Mike. Yeah, like every couple 3 years.
Do you? Yeah.
Certainly, when I did this book and interviewed most of them were by phone. I went to see some, but 140 hours of recorded interviews to put this thing together. And so I reconnected with some of my Cardiac Kid teammates, and I have an occasion now to call 4 or 5 of them on it.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's where is Mike Phipps?
Mike's down in Florida.
Is he? Okay.
Mike's insurance guy.
I see.
But, of course, Sipe's out in San Diego.
Yes.
Yeah, these guys are scattered all over.
Boy, you've got, other than some of those thrilling moments in 1980, you had a long career. What other moments in your life stand out?
In football?
Yeah.
Well, Dan, I'll never forget the game that where I won the job. Ironically, we were playing the Green Bay Packers in Cleveland, and 68, last preseason game. And there was it was the year when Art did the doubleheader.
That's right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So there's 85,000 people at a preseason game. And I'm not sure if it was might have been the first game, I don't know, that I played in the stadium. But I'm on the sideline. Mm-hmm. And my idol is Bart Starr and was Johnny Unitas as a quarterback in high school. And being from Colorado, you didn't hear too much about the Browns, but the Green Bay Packers were Vince Lombardi, Jim Taylor. And Dan, I'll tell you what, I'm standing on the sideline on the national anthem. A beautiful night. I look across the field and I almost passed out because there was Vince Lombardi, Jim Taylor, Paul Hornung, all the people that I'm here. Well, bottom line is, I remember that, but I also remember we got beat 33-9. And I somehow kicked 3 field goals that night, and I don't remember going on the field. So that was the night that they did. They announced that Lou was going to retire. So that was it. But the most memorable.
Now was Lou in training camp that year?
Yeah.
Oh, he was.
That would have been 67. Lou kept his job for his 21st year. I fortunately had signed a 2-year contract, so I came back in 68, and that's when I got the job. And Lou announced his retirement after that ball game. The most memorable game I was ever in was, again, 1972. That year I gave up everything. Yeah. And we're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in Cleveland. 10th game of the season. And I'd had a phenomenal season. Second longest field goal in NFL history. I'm third in the NFL in punting. I hadn't missed a field goal under 40 yards the entire season. It was one of those things, 10th game of the season. Do you remember the year I said I gave it up before the year started?
Right, yeah.
Okay. Now this becomes a little more real.
And you made All-Pro that year.
Made All-Pro, but in this game against the Steelers, again, you know how it used to be with the Steelers and the Browns. Mm-hmm. And it was a rainy, nasty, muddy day in Cleveland. You know how.
Was it a day or a Saturday night?
No, that was the day.
That
was the day, Sunday afternoon. Muddy. And I'd kicked 3 field goals during the course of the day, but we end up with 5 minutes to go. They go up 23-24. We're down by 1. And again, I say this jokingly, but I was serious. I think I was when we got the ball with 5 minutes to go, I was praying, Lord, help him score a touchdown. I'd already been out there 3 times. But anyway, so Mike Phipps again, and kind of like a cardiac kid thing, takes the team right down the field. Mm-hmm. And I find myself out there attempting a 37-yard field goal with 2 minutes and 5 seconds to go. Most important kick of my life. Right then, right there. I mean, I had a great year. Nothing mattered. This was the kick. We're playing the Steelers. We beat them. We're tied for the division race in 1972. And the bottom line is, I missed it. I looked up too quick, the cardinal rule. And I remember I looked up and that ball was missing about 1 inch to the right upright. And Dan, I'll tell you right now, I was ready to die. I mean, not only was the game important, but remember I said I made that decision because the season was started, and I'm almost blaming God. You could have moved the goalpost, you could have done something, Mm-hmm. And there was no joking about it. And I remember coming off the field, and I just, why? I was ready to die. And I remember when I say encouragement, that's what I started to say earlier. We got to be encouragers in life. I remember Billy Andrews, linebacker, came over when the Steelers now had the football, and I was down. And he said, Don, get your chin up. We're going to get the ball back. We're going to give you a second chance. And I said, Billy, and he just shook me. He said, Don, don't quit. Okay, Billy, and another linebacker or another defensive back said, Don, we're going to get the ball back. We're going to give you a second chance. And I began to look out there. Now it's second down, third down. Jerry Shirk sacks Terry Bradshaw on third down. They have to punt. I think it was Leroy returned to punt to about the 40. And I knew, man, now if we get 2-3 first downs, I'm going to have that second chance. I actually prayed, Lord, I'll keep my head down. Give me a second chance. Dan, bottom line is 13 seconds remaining in the game. I found myself back out on that field within about a half a yard of where I was when I missed 2 minutes earlier. And, of course, this time, the snap, the hold, kept my head down. And when I hit the ball, I said, it's got to be good. And when I looked up, man, I saw heaven, because that ball was dead center. We beat them 26-24. This was a large book, 672 pages, and I got the story in there. But if I were to write about a book about my moments, nothing would compare to that one, because I got a second chance. How many times you get a second chance? The agony of defeat, and 2 minutes later, the thrill of victory. Yeah, that was my best, except maybe Red Right 88. Maybe that might have been my best till we got out there and done it.
Boy, it has been fun reminiscing with you about those days, because I was there, a reporter at the time for the Plain Dealer, covering many of those games you referred to. I would have interviewed you in the locker room after that Steelers game when you had the second chance.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that you had shared that story as inspirationally with me back then as you just did now.
Well, I have a lot of time to reflect on it.
Oh.
Dan, it's a pleasure being with you.
It has been a pleasure. Don Cockroft, a Browns legend in Cleveland. Thanks for all you did for the city of Cleveland and for the Cleveland Browns and for the fans. Good luck with the book. It's a great book. I recommend it. Let me hold it up for everybody one more time.
It's a big book.
Okay, there it is, and it's worth every penny. Don, thanks.
The cardiackids.com. The cardiackids.com. That's where people can go. And I'm going to say this. If they mention our show, your show, whenever they hear this, if they will put, where did they hear about this book, and mention you, I will actually sign the book for them. And because I send them out, I ship it, I do them all.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks from on behalf of the Cleveland Public Library. Thanks for being with us, Don Cockroft.
Thank you, Dan.